Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Triple N Media. I am Dr. Nik Nikam from Houston, Texas. The topic of focus in this presentation is effects of loss of a loved one, whether it happens suddenly or over a prolonged period or a protracted period or an anticipated period. What are the stages of shock and grief we go through, and what are the long term effects, and how do we actually deal with that and try to come ahead in the future? Whether we are dealing with the loss of a loved one, be it a child, be it a spouse, or a divorce, or a major catastrophic illness, or the death of a loved one, especially in the senior years, where you're dependent on only one person, we go through the period of shock. After the ceremony is over, we are going to enter a stage of what I call a series of events which are most beautifully depicted by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She took care of thousands of cancer patients, and she saw families going through these various stages of emotional problems related to this anticipated doom and gloom day of their loved one when they were going through cancer. She wrote a book called Death and Dying. Check it out, please. And in that, she talks about 5 stages of dealing with a loss of a loved one for any reason for that matter. We have initial denial and shock. Even if it were to happen over a protracted period of time, an anticipated period of time, even when you finally get that news, this person has finally left this universe, that brings in a shock. Like a sinking sensation where you feel dizzy, you feel helpless, you feel weak in your limbs. This is what is called as the vagal reaction, and you feel drained. You're going to need help with people to help you even regain your composure. Then this is followed by denial. And if it's a case of a child, there could be anger because you didn't do enough, your spouse didn't do enough, you didn't take care of this problem earlier, or you didn't address this issue properly. Denial, or the doctor didn't do it properly. This is followed by bargaining. Well, after all, he didn't suffer that much. He was not in a nursing home for 5 years. Then it is going to be followed by a protracted period of depression. You need to understand the symptoms of depression. It could be anxiety, it's lack of appetite, lack of sleep, irritability, and periods of mood swings going from normal to significantly depressed, isolated, and trying to separate yourself from the rest of the universe. Eventually, the stage of recovery or the stage of acceptance, this is where you begin to accept the reality that that's what it is. You can't change what has happened, but you have to take care of what's left, and that is yourself, your mind, body, and soul. They need to fill that vacuum. They need to find something else to keep you busy, active, productive, and joyful. To show it in a different pattern, here are the phases of grief. You go from a normal positive energy, you go through the shock, refusal, resistance, catharsis, resignation, and reintegration. That means you have to be a new you in order to deal and live your life even with the loss of that individual. And if you look at this over a time frame and you realize this is like the effects of a major hurricane I've lived in Houston for 40 years, gone through several major catastrophic hurricanes, and some of the effects of Harvey are still there after several years. So the loss of a loved one is going to have a long-term effects on our mind, body, and soul, and that is the initial shock and denial could be short-lived. Then it is followed by a period of anger and bargain, but it is the depression that is going to last for a longer period of time. It's not going to be over in a couple of months or even a few months. It may take more than a year or two to get over this depression. And those who accept this situation and try to rejuvenate their lives, try to fill that void with something else in their lives, those are the ones who are going to make it through this timeline, whereas those who just feel like they are helpless, their life is just not worth without that person, then they are going to end up in a crisis situation, which can lead to much bigger problems than the problem they had to begin with. Here's a study that looked at the 1,500 plus people, 65 years or older, who lost a loved one. And they looked at their symptomatology at 6 months, 18 months, and 48-month intervals. All these people had lost their loved ones, and these were elderly couple, so they were dependent on their spouses to a certain degree, and that loss led to anger, shock, grief, anxiety, depression. And surprisingly, these symptoms were not much different at 6 months or 18 months intervals. That should come as no shock, and I will explain as to why. Of course, the shock element was much more profound in an acute loss compared to an anticipated loss, but the other symptoms like anger, grief, depression, they are extended over a period of months or even a few years, because the depression is like the long-term effect of this loss of a loved one. However, in this day and age, we have help. We can seek medical help for acute symptoms like anxiety, apprehension, panic attacks. All these things can be controlled with medications. And we have social workers, psychologists, and communities that can help us to find something to do in that gap so that we can rebuild ourselves. As I said, yes, we have lost a loved one, but what's left is us, and it is up to us to see how we can rebuild our life, and there are many tools available, and we just have to seek help. And those who fail to seek help may end up in a bigger and more devastating crisis. I wrote a book on stress-free lifestyle, and in that book, I created a chapter called Crisis Management. I said, yes, none of us want to plan for a crisis management, but we plan for a building fire. We plan for hurricanes. We plan for plane disasters. So life is something we don't know what it has in store for us. Hence, we all should create a crisis management folder and put in there what I would do if I were to lose the life of a child, a spouse, a brother, or an immediate family member or a parent. Financially, what we need to do. How are we going to deal with the initial shock? And how are we going to deal with this depression? And where are we going to seek help? And when we put down those things, it is just like executing the plans for a hurricane. Before the hurricane comes, when the hurricane makes a landfall, and the aftermath of the water and wind damage, how do you restore electrical lines and things like that. We need to seek help. It is going to take tremendous energy and support from many people to rebuild our lives. It is like doing surgery after a major motor vehicle accident. You may have to go through several surgeries to just reconstruct your body. It may not be back to normal, but at least it is functional. And you want to be functional. You want to fill your void with something. You want to be productive and you want to be joyful. And there is help available. Please do check out my book on stress-free lifestyle. And when watching Triple N Media, I am Dr. Nik Nikam from Houston, Texas. Thank you so much, and please do subscribe to our YouTube channel.